ahead, Dr. Cambridge. You
Yes,
just
Alvin. So where are we?
well, let me turn off this music. We were talking about the intersection.
I hear you.
Yes, I just had to turn it off. Yes, we were talking about the intersection.
Okay. The urban reality that I lived in um, was a multi-ethnic intersect reality.
Hmm.
So as you drew my attention to that at Middle and and East Street, there was the drugstore, the cake shop that had the jukebox that that had Gene and Dinah and Mr. Ben Wooddick on their playlist. You had a lot of calypso on that playlist, and you had a lot of Western music, particularly American music, on those jukeboxes. But if you went down Middle Street to Thomas Street's corner, the cake shop there was owned by Mr. Gomes. So the commercial sector was really multi ethnic, and that was part of the reality that I lived in. For example, the radio was another source for delivering music. So early in the morning, in addition to religious music, we had the music of our Indian ancestry. And a lot of that was bhajans and religious kinds of music. The other time we would hear Indian music would be Sundays. So the radio broadcasting in a way represented certain social, cultural, and political realities of Guyanese society and has continued to play that role or have that kind of barometric role in Guyanese society since I was a youngster and more recently when I studied musical life in Guyana. So music in growing up in Georgetown also represented a social hierarchy. At the apex represented the aesthetics of the group that controlled and wielded power in Guyanese society. And we talk about the musical aesthetics of the state, the type of music, the governing powers in a society privilege. And so when I was growing up, it was clear to me that the musical hierarchy privileged European musical aesthetics. That was the repertoire. Guyanese of all ethnicities played that music. The British Guyana Militia Band, which was made up of Guyanese of all ethnicities, Portuguese, Africans, people of Indian ancestry, Bajans. They played this European repertoire with great confidence. The British Guyana Philharmonic Orchestra played that. The Guyanese, the vast numbers of Guyanese women, Edna Jordan, Lynette Dolphin, Mrs. Hunt. These were people who demonstrated that although they were not European, that they had its technique, skills, and competencies to play this music. You also had in the rural areas, you had our African folk music. We had our Indian folk music, which we didn't know much about. And then in the hinterland, we had our Amerindian relatives playing music with a wide repertoire of instruments. And as a space, the hinterland as a space began to influence Guyanese musical creativity. So when Holly Bryant wrote Onward, Upward, May We Ever Go, born in the land of the mighty Roraima, he is speaking of a hinterland that he is visiting to spread his Christian message. When Mortimer Cossu writes about my native land, he's comparing Guyana's geography with that of other lands afar. So that intersection was a rich intersection. It was an intersection of the various peoples who have peopled Guyana. It's our indigenous people, our European tradition, our African tradition, our Chinese, our Portuguese, our Indo-Guyanese, our mixtures, our Trinidadians, our Bajans. Because remember, Guyana, coming out of the emancipation era, is a place that is attracting populations from from around the world. So that kind of musical repertoire, that kind of musical treasure chest, is evident in Guyana. But it is privileged. Certain types of music are privileged. Certain types of music are maligned, marginalized, harassed. Masquerade was harassed. Steel band was harassed. The music of the practice, the working people's dances, those places were harassed. They were heavily surveilled by law enforcement, units. And so this is what you had. You start to see a change taking place in the society as the political process began to change. So in '53, when you have this first election by universal adult suffrage, Guyana enters what Martin Carter would call an inevitable journey is started, a destination that is inevitable. He says inexorably and inevitably, and he's referring to independence.
That's
So
preparation.
although the Constitution is suspended in '53, and the government that was elected by universal suffrage expelled, an interim government is introduced. And they deal with some structural issues, housing, the beginnings of industrialization on the East Bank there. There's increased geopolitical activity. The Americans increase their cultural life. The British Council becomes more animated. And in this churn that is taking place, by 1958, when the suspension is over, the interim government is finished, new elections are held, and a now divided PPP wins. The faction of the PPP that wins is the Jaganite faction. And among the things they do is to launch the National History and Culture Week. And in that little act there, which is an act of preparation for independence, we begin to see a deliberate actions by the government of the day to promote Guyanese songs, Guyanese musical endeavors. Still very urban oriented. So you have Hugh Sam composing a variation on 3 Guyanese folk songs, an original piece of music. But here is Hugh Sam doing in the 1950s what De Wever did at the turn of the 20th century, which was to go into the reservoir of folk idiom, folk composition, folk creativity, and elevate that to a position of respect and recognition. And I think that first National History and Culture Week, 1958, launches a new mood in terms of Guyanese musical creativity. And there's a lot going on in the urban area, in the rural areas, and in the hinterland areas. Around the same time, the steel band is really beginning to spread its wings. Bertrand de Varel and Charvin Burnham And these guys would tell you that by the beginning of the 50s, steel band is beginning to have a presence in Guyana. There's a solidarity between working class Guyanese and working class Trinidadians. The story is told of Pemia, the founder and tuner of Quo Vadis. It is said that Pemia was a seaman, and when he would travel to Trinidad, he would interface with Trinidadians who were in the process of creating their own, that new sound. So, in the preparation for independence, there is deliberate effort by the state to encourage and support that. However, it was, some would say it was a little bit schizophrenic. The British Guyana Police Male Voice Choir, one of the pioneering groups in Guyana, particularly in terms of promoting Afro-Guyanese folk creativity. There's a music festival, and there's a section for folk music. They present their song, and the adjudicator asks, why are they sounding so Englishified, right? So you've got that kind of schizophrenia, you want to go with what you have, but you are not bold or confident, or you're not satisfied with the aesthetics of ancestry, and so you backtrack. We are going to see a dramatic change after independence, where the politics of Guyana is about decolonization, where it is about creating an identity. And you see that very evident in the policy and practices of the People's National Congress administration from 66 through to 92. You see both the heavy touch and you see both the light touch. Mm-hmm. By the heavy touch, I'm talking about policy positions. For example, there is the remigration scheme, and Guyanese in diaspora who wanted to remigrate to Guyana were given certain incentives. One of the persons who took that incentive, just after independence, was Terry Nelson, who came to Guyana and established Halagala Records and Pressing Plant. So here he is, bringing an element of the music industry to Guyana, and this is government policy. And his work is he experiments with this blend, what Wordsworth McAndrew referred to as blend music, or more popularly known as Afro-Indie beat, and then contemporary known as chutney. So you have that kind of development taking place in the post-independence era. You have the institutions like the Cultural Center being created and privileging certain types of musical expression. You have the return of musical theater with the President's Birthday concerts, and you've got the CC Varieties as a strategy for promoting domestic popular music. And this is taking place in the urban sector. But in the rural areas, outside of the African rural mix, we are not hearing much about what our Indo-Guyanese brothers and sisters are doing with music. So we are grateful to people like Peter Kempadu and Mark Matthews, who did enormous work in the field and helped to bring to the public's attention the Creole language Indo-Guyanese folk music, right? Not Hindi, but Creole, this time the long time, this time the long time, this not there before time. That kind of repertoire is released, brought to national consciousness in the early 70s, just as we were beginning to move into things like Carrie Festa, and the Nana-Line conference in Guyana. There's this eruption of creativity, and this new music comes out. In time, the government of Guyana in the post-independence period becomes the largest controller of musical life in Guyana. And we see a number of traditions. We see music that is lasting. I like my local fish. I like my local dish. This is a calypso that could stand its time. It's a record of a time when Guyana, either we could use the term banned a bunch of stuff, or to use the more politically correct term, or economic strategy, import substitution. But this was a time that El Cid is singing about when he sings about my local fish. And then you've got Mashramani, which became your major musical season in Guyana, very controlled by the state. And you see a person like Rebel is saying, I'm bringing second. Each year I'm known as PS, the permanent second, because it is suggested that his lyrics are not in sync with what the political directorate of that period of time necessarily wanted to be heard of. So you have that. Now, when we look into the urban, so what I just spoke about was primarily the fingerprint of the urban Guyana during that early post-independence era. If we look in rural Guyana, there are other musical stories being told. If you go to a place like Port Morant, which is a very important community in Guyanese life, you would find a musician like Tilak, Balgangador Tilak, a multi-instrumentalist. And Tilak is not only proficient with Indian genres, the ragas, the religious music. He's also an exponent in Tan, which is an original kind of Indian classical music that is developed in Guyana and Suriname and Trinidad. But Guyana, for a very long time, was recognized as kind of the apex of Tan music in the Caribbean. So you have this is taking place in rural Guyana among the music of our Indian heritage. In the hinterland area, region, not only are the conditions of life in the hinterland, the harvesting of the hinterland, the balata and the timber and the gold and the diamond, and the geography, those things are all influencing music in Guyana. But as researchers like Rohan Segar is pointing out to us, across the ethnic communities of our indigenous people, you have discrete musical moments and musical styles. There's Mari Mari, and there's Banshikali, and there's the guitar, the string-based music of what we call the Spanish Caribs. So in this period of time, by the time we get into that first post-independence era, there are many, many musical genres that are alive and well, and it is the policy of the state to facilitate and encourage those kinds of things. It's the challenge of the radio system to reflect those realities. The economic downturn of the late 70s and the crises of the 80s did put as one person says, I think it is Bonial says, that crisis, that 70s, 80s crisis, pushes the pause button on Guyanese creativity. And into that void is a resurgence of Jamaican music. Ken Lazarus, starting with Ken Lazarus and the Lovers Rock. At one point of time in 1970 or 72, sometime around then, there's a hit parade season in which 8 of the top 10 tunes are by Jamaicans. Ken Lazarus leading the pack. And then that whole conscious music of Marley comes in. And that is a transforming moment in Guyana, because Guyana popular culture becomes very roots with a Jamaican accent, and that has remained pleasant,
Dr. Cambridge,
present.
Dr.